Welcome to the Mindcraft podcast. My name is Kimberly Quinn, and I am here with the wonderful Rachel D. Simone, and I'm so super stoked. I met Rachel through uh, her partner Faith, who I've known for a very, very long time, decade at least, I would say. And I'm so thrilled that to have Rachel on the show that I could, just implode because Rachel is an integrative physical therapist who merges Ayurveda, right? Ayurveda type of yoga with modern pain science in order to treat the whole person. As Rachel tells me, to treat the whole person rather than just the symptoms, right? So,
Mhm.
welcome to the Minecraft podcast, Rachel.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so super stoked, Rachel, and I'm excited for you because I don't know that I have to tell you, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone, and I love to nerd out. I just heard Rachel say how excited she is to talk about pain in the nervous system. I think that's awesome. And she's got a lot of kind of different ways of looking at things that I am 2000% sure are going to be relatable to the listeners. So, Rachel, why don't maybe you start by explaining why you get so excited about pain and the nervous system?
Yeah, absolutely. So, pain, I think, is not really well understood in this country, and it's not treated well or treated compassionately. And we have an epidemic of pain. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think understanding pain goes a long way to helping to relieve pain. And so I get excited to talk about it because I know how hopeless it can feel when you're in a pain state. And I really think that there's so much that pain science is offering us these days to help us shift out of that place of hopelessness and into a place of solution. And so, I want to define a little bit some of the things that we're talking about. So, there's lots of different kinds of pain. And, the obvious kind of pain is if you have an injury, then it makes sense that it would hurt, right? If you break a bone or you sprain your ankle, then there's pain associated with that. Now, ideally, when you have an injury like that, the body will heal itself. I mean, it's pretty amazing, actually, our resilience and our healing capacity. And so the body should heal. And as the body's healing, the pain should subside. And for many people, that's what happens. But for 1 in 4 people, actually, the pain doesn't go away, even though the injury has healed. The other thing that's important to recognize is that we actually can have pain without having an injury or without having clear tissue damage, because pain is fundamentally, it's your nervous system's reaction to the perception of threat, right? It's your reaction to the perception of threat. And so whether or not that threat is actually present doesn't matter. What matters is how you're interpreting it. And so the way that I like to think about that is I'm a little bit afraid of snakes. And so if I was walking in the woods and I saw a snake, I would probably have a physiological reaction, right? My heart rate would probably go up. I'd probably get a little scared. My breathing might change. And I would probably be scanning my environment, trying to figure out how I could get away from the snake and protect myself, right? But if I realize 2 seconds later that it's not actually a snake, it's actually a rope coiled up on the ground in front of me, my whole experience of that situation is going to change. So the way we relate to something really influences how we experience it. And what's cool about modern pain science is that they're realizing that pain is actually a top-down experience, right? It's the nervous system interpreting information from the environment, and then based on past experience and contextual cues and the level of stress that's already present in the environment, right, deciding whether or not it's a dangerous situation. And so in some ways, pain is actually a good thing because it helps to keep us safe. And I think that that's kind of a beautiful thing, right? Like when we have pain, I have a little bit of gratitude for that sometimes because it's our body's way of saying there might be some danger. Let's pay attention. Let's figure out if there's a real threat and then respond appropriately so that we can protect ourselves.
I love that. I love that. And I liked also, Rachel, how you were saying earlier that we've kind of been conditioned to not listen to the body trying to communicate with us, and that the body has wisdom of its own. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so our bodies are communicating with us all the time, right? We might have the urge, for example, to yawn or to sneeze, or we might get kind of distracted or spacey or have trouble concentrating when we've worked too much and we really need a break. We might feel tired or hungry, right? Our bodies are sending signals all the time. And I think for a lot of us, we're culturally conditioned to override a lot of those messages, right? So how many times have you or your listeners said yes when really what you meant was no, or
Mm-hmm.
decided to just power through, and even though you're hungry, you want to finish that one task, write that last email, and check off that last thing on the list, right? Or stayed up too late trying to finish a paper or do a project, right? We often override those cues. And when we do that, that over time starts to communicate to our nervous systems that things might not be safe. Because the nervous system has two different speeds, right? It has fight, flight, freeze, fawn
Mm-hmm.
speed, and then it has rest and digest speed. And when we're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn speed, our bodies aren't worrying about sleeping or eating, right? We're not really able to do those functions when we're
Right,
in that state.
right.
And so when we live our lives day to day and we don't rest when we're tired and we don't eat when we're hungry and we don't take breaks, unfortunately, what that does is it starts to send the signal to our nervous system that things might be a little bit dangerous. We might not be as safe. And
Mm-hmm.
we kind of stay in that sympathetic land or that fight, flight, freeze, fawn land. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally, definitely. And I like how you cleared things up for the readers, because of course you and I have this in common. I love all this brainy stuff too. Is that the brain doesn't know the difference, right?
Yes.
So you could be sitting on your couch with your partner, or in a dorm, or with your parents, or with yourself, and nothing's going on, but it's what you perceive as a threat that's sending the brain into, versus actually having a mugger right behind you. But the brain doesn't know the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I joke all the time. The brain doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a blind date or just living your life, right? And so the little things that we do every day can help our brains to recognize when it's safe and when it's not. And one of the things that can happen is if we're kind of at that elevated level for a prolonged period, it can be really hard for us to do things like rest, because it's our nervous system's kind of so amped up that it's hard for it to get the sense of safety and the signal that it's actually okay to rest. And so then we end up doing things like doom scrolling and staying up and playing a game for way too long, because our nervous system doesn't know how to find that power down button, right? How to come into a place of being settled.
I really like that, Rachel. I think maybe can maybe emphasize, or maybe elaborate more. I like how you said power down, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this with I had mostly first years as a professor. You
Mm-hmm.
might say it in different ways, but they do not know how to power down, to hit the pause button, and to just, they learn it in Minecraft eventually, but they don't come in knowing it at all. And they just stay at this heightened, alert place, which eventually takes its toll on us, right? What might be some things, or how can it take its toll on us if we are not knowing how to power down?
Well, I think it's a spectrum, and initially it can take its toll on our concentration and our mood and our ability to be present in our relationships. And, I don't want to be doomsday, but eventually there's only so much our bodies can take of that. Right. And
Right.
so we start to have like a nervous system and an endocrine or a hormonal response, an immune system response. And that's how people over a long period of time can spiral into something like a persistent pain state or an autoimmune
Mhm.
condition, because the body can only hold at bay for so long. And that line where that is different for each person.
Right.
But
Right.
eventually, right? So some people maybe can tolerate it for a year. Some people can tolerate it for 10. Some people can tolerate it until they hit menopause and their hormones change. And all of a sudden, they don't have the protective barrier of estrogen if
Mhm,
they're
mhm,
in
mhm.
bodies that produce estrogen primarily. And then things start to shift, right? So it depends on the person, but there's a cumulative effect over time that can lead to pretty serious levels of pain and dysfunction in our bodies.
Yeah, and it's amazing because I'm sure you've heard a lot of different webinars and conferences when people are talking with about similar things. They'll say that it sends us into a state of dis-ease,
Yeah.
dis-ease, right? So
Yeah.
they're saying fit the physical manifestations and also the mental manifestations. And you were also talking about earlier, Rachel, how you help people find their own homeostasis.
Mhm.
You want to maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and maybe what it is, explain kind of what you mean, and then how you go about working with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I think that we're each born with a particular set of gifts. And when we're really well resourced, those gifts are naturally at the forefront of our lives. And when we're not, when we're in a state of depletion, which could come from any number of things, including just not resting enough and
Hmm.
not being well nourished or well supported, then it's harder to be in that place of resilience and to have those gifts come forward. And so, one of the things I love to do is help people figure out, who are you when you're rested, when you feel supported, when you have all the resources that you need and you're not struggling, right? What does that look like for you? And what are the kinds of things that you need in order to be in that place more of the time, right? Because our lives aren't perfect. The reality is
Right,
we live,
right, right.
and there's systemic forces at play that make it hard for us to do that all the time, right? But to the best of our ability with the resources that we have, what are the kinds of things that each of us need in order to feel really well resourced? How much sleep do you need every night in order to feel resourced, right? What kind of nourishment do you need? How many breaks do you need a day? What kind of friendships or other kinds of supports do you need? What practices help to fuel you? And again, it's different for everybody. But if we approach it from that place, then it becomes really personalized. It's not a one size fits all kind of medicine, right? And I think that happens a lot in our culture, right? Somebody gives the health benefits of a superfood like ashwagandha, and then everybody should take ashwagandha, right? Or somebody says, this is a really great breathing practice. And it might be, but it's not necessarily a good breathing practice for you in this moment, right? And so I think that personalization or that personalized approach is important. And it all goes back to helping people understand what their bodies need and are communicating and learning how to be responsive and respectful of those cues to really give themselves what they need in order to thrive and not just feel like they're in survival mode.
Right. I wonder, Rachel, if you can sort of help the listeners. Okay, so we're we are born into this world all, wet and warm, right? With these inherent gifts. Then we are very in tune with ourselves as little babies, as far as ouch, that hurts, or, babies cry when they don't even have language because they're not in homeostasis for whatever reason. And then
Mhm.
something happens. And so, what do you think are some of the things that get in the way of that sort of natural communication
Mm.
that we're all born with, right? We say little babies know how to get their needs met, right? And then something sort of happens. And so, what are some of the blockers that prevent adults from listening and hearing, the body's language, what the body is saying, and kind of, listening and kind of acting on it?
That is such a good question. And I feel like it's like a can of worms.
Yes.
Right. And so, I think if we can go really deep underneath the surface of all the possible causal factors, I think some of it is a fundamental fear of not being enough. And
Ooh,
that
okay.
drives this sense of perfectionism and feeding into the cultural norms around productivity and being good and doing all of the time. And again, it becomes this kind of cultural expectation that we override our needs or sacrifice what we need either for the work or for another person or for a perceived level of comfort for a group or an individual.
Mhm.
And I really think that underneath that is that core wound of just not enoughness, right? And not feeling comfortable being with what is real and true, right? Feeling like we need to project a particular image. And I just think about how different things would be if we were actually allowed, and we allowed ourselves to feel what we were feeling, right? To cry when we're sad and rest when we're tired, and to, you know, really allow ourselves to be real and not feel like we have to project a particular image.
I love that. You know, occasionally I'll present on self-care, and I don't do the typical one, which is go get a massage, drink your orange juice. Like, it goes much deeper because what you're saying, because we cannot take care of a self we don't value.
Yes.
I mean, that's the systemic root right there. I didn't know what you were going to say to that, actually, but then I was like, go Rachel, because that feeling of original worthiness, we were born with it. It's there. It just, as adults, sometimes we need to do an excavation because
Oh.
things have happened. It's the authentic self is in there somewhere. She's just waiting to be invited back into the driver's seat, right? You know, stuff happens that kind of clouds our, I think clouds our perception, you know, the society's conditioning and all that sort of thing, like you were saying.
Yeah, and there's real systemic forces at play, right? And so I don't
Mhm.
want to give the impression that this is easy
No,
work or that we can just self-care away these problems, right? We live in a world with racism and homophobia and economic disparity, right? And so there's real systemic forces at play that create the soup or the water that we swim in. And it's important to name that because it's not as simple as just saying, well, I'll do this breathing practice and then I'll be
right,
healed and all will be fine. And we can get trapped a little bit in this like cult of healing worship, right? Feeling like if I just do these things, then I'll be better,
right,
then I'll
right.
be saved. And I that's where I come back to that place of our gifts and our basic goodness, right? Like we already have those things within. And I love what you just said about excavation. This is the perfect word.
Right? It's like an archaeological dig.
Yeah.
Because, and I know, and especially, and thank you, Rachel, when you brought up all of those, you know, huge societal wounds, injuries, right, that affect, all of that feeds into the not enoughness, all those other big, larger anti-Semitism, all the everything that's going on with, you know, all that big stuff, feeds into, or can feed into, the not enoughness and the self value too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to name that and to recognize that it's not an individual moral failing. Because I think that can happen. We can kind of get into a place of blame sometimes, right? Like, you know, you still have pain because you didn't do a good enough job doing all the things you were supposed to do in order to be healed. Or maybe you're suffering because you're not eating the perfect organic
Right, right,
food,
right.
right?
You had a brief craving for a little Debbie's, and now there's and now there's guilt. But no, but I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that when I asked the not enoughness. I wasn't sure if you might say trauma, you might say this, you might say that. But no matter what, Rachel, right? Something we can do it like air quotes. Something gets in the way of that precious little cherub infant that's born with everything, you know, she or he or they need, right? We're born with it, and then some stuff happens along the way, and then here we are as adults, sometimes disconnected, mind and body disconnected a little bit as far as their communication. So I think what you were saying earlier is surviving versus thriving, right? And that you help people maybe relearn or tap into that original, you know, the gifts we are born with. You help them be able to see that again, right?
Mhm.
So maybe you want to share with us a little bit of what you actually, you know, do with your Ayurveda and your all the kind of physical therapy type things you do.
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, Ayurveda is one of the oldest systems of medicine still living in the world today. It comes originally from India. And it's an elemental science. So what that means is that it's based on the elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And each of those elements exists in everything in nature and has particular qualities. And we are nature, so they also exist within us, right? We're not part of nature, we actually are nature. And so
Right,
all
right,
of
right.
the qualities that exist in nature exist in our nature as well. And they exist in different proportions in every being, in every human, and then also in all of the different beings that exist out in the world. And so that lens helps to provide a framework, a starting point, right? It's not dogmatic or prescriptive. It's just an opportunity to try to understand ourselves and our relationship to our world. And so that's the lens or framework that I use to help people understand, again, what their constitution is and what they need, right? So somebody, for example, who has a lot of wind and space in their constitution might feel a little bit more anxiety than somebody who has a lot of earth and water in their constitution. And so being able to understand what qualities are present and know how to interpret them gives people the tools to then be able to make really informed decisions so that they know how to help themselves. So a concrete example of that is I have a little bit of fire in my constitution, and I love spicy things. I love fiery things. Like the more hot sauce, the better. I would put hot sauce on everything if I could. But my body doesn't love that so much, especially in the summer. So when it's hot outside,
right.
spicy food as well as I do in the winter. And I didn't recognize those seasonal shifts until I started to look at the big picture and kind of zoom out a little bit and recognize that nature falls in rhythm, right? There's a rhythm to nature. And so there's a rhythm to our lives too. And so the way that the things I choose to eat in the summer are going to be a little different than the things I choose to eat in the winter, not because I'm following any laws or prescriptions or diets, but because I'm listening to how my body's responding and realizing, oh yeah, the spicy food, that's too much heat when it's already hot outside. I benefit from that in the winter, but I don't benefit from that in the summer. So that's just a really small example, but hopefully that communicates a little bit what I mean about understanding your constitution and how your constitution is influenced by your environment.
Well, I like the part you said listening, because in our system, you were alluding to it earlier, Rachel, we can get, especially if we're sort of struggling with our enoughness, it's very, because that's so excruciating to not feel worthy. I think it's so easy to unconsciously almost seek out distractions
Absolutely.
to pull us away from what we really need to look at, right? So when you were so how would one, for our listeners here, how would somebody sort of get started? Let's say they're just kind of listening to you now, having some aha moments with all these lovely wisdom bombs, okay? Realizing that they want to start this maybe self-discovery journey, kind of getting more in tune with the mind-body connection. How would you suggest let's think baby steps. How do you think they would start to kind of look for what the body's trying to say? How can they be more receptive? Think like a catcher's mitt. It's baseball season. How can they have more of a catcher's mitt stance? Like, I'm ready. Bring it on. How would they do that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but it all comes down to slowing down a little bit and paying attention.
Okay, all right.
And so, for example, I see this in yoga a lot. So I'm also a yoga teacher, and I see, you're in a group class, and not everybody needs the same things, right? And so whoever's teaching will give an instruction, and everyone will do it. And sometimes there's a little bit of lack of awareness or discernment as to whether or not that was a helpful practice for each of the people in the moment. And so slowing down, I think, can be really helpful, right? Whether it's yoga or food or when you need to take a break when you're studying, right? Whatever it happens to be, taking a moment to pause and to think, what is it that I really need right now? And to see if you can hear the answer. And then when you give yourself that, how does it affect you, right? So for example, if you've been playing a game and you're kind of like stuck in that mode and you can't get out of it, how does it affect you if you play for hours at a time versus if you take a break and put the screen down and take a few deep breaths or go outside, right? So starting to be aware of how things affect you. And then the beyond the baby step, I think, is having a practice where you get quiet and you listen, even if it's just for a couple of minutes a day. I think that that's so powerful.
Huge.
And a big part of the challenge that we all live with is our discomfort with discomfort. And I'm not at all implying that we should do things on purpose to make ourselves uncomfortable, but rather to recognize that we are going to have waves in our lives, right? There are going to be some things that are highs and some things that are lows. And a lot of our challenge individually and culturally is it's so uncomfortable to be in those low points that we look for anything we can to try to distract ourselves from feeling what we feel. And so building up a practice where you take a short amount of time, right? It could be a couple of minutes, it could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour, right? But you can start small, building up a practice where you sit down and you just be with yourself without having to do anything or change anything or fix anything, without having to respond, right? Just practicing being there builds up our muscle capacity for being present with things as they arise, so that when there is a challenge, we are better equipped to be able to stay with it, right? And not feel like we have to distract ourselves or dissociate from it or fill that hole with something that maybe isn't as helpful for us.
No, I love it. It's like charging your spiritual battery or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch, 3 and 4-year-olds in a sandbox. They're 100% in the moment. Like they don't even need this lesson. So part of me feels like what's happened to us in 2024. That we have to actually work at. And, adults have to work at being still and quiet and listening. When something was once natural. And I also liked how you were saying, Rachel, kind of becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, because especially for those listeners or anywhere along the spectrum of the journey, life is mostly spectrums. I don't think it's ever here or here. Really, there's always a middle, right? It wouldn't matter what it is. Violin, sexuality, it's all a spectrum. Nervous versus anxious. There's all a spectrum with this self discovery journey. That when they do kind of the prompt you sort of gave to us, that if you're in whatever situation where you might be tired or hungry or thirsty, or it's a relationship thing and you're feeling a vibe that's not great, and you're saying to yourself privately, what do I need right now? And if the answer is challenging, like get up and go out the door, or excuse yourself socially to go get a drink when that's maybe just a little socially awkward because you're at a thing, an event or something, and you feel this little tiny bit of discomfort, to acknowledge and have a conversation. Maybe I'm feeling a little uncomfortable because I've got to be assertive in a few moments, but that's okay because I am showing myself love. Right?
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to look at it, right? What does self-love look like in this moment?
Which would be another, which maybe like that, maybe that's the advanced version, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what do I need? And then as you progress, to say, loving myself means what in this exact minute? Like whether it's you're at a social thing and somebody's in the middle of it, really, like mid sentence in a conversation, and all of a sudden, I don't know, you just have to get something to drink, whatever, or it's an awkward relationship thing. To really give yourself the green light with that, you can be polite and excuse yourself, but I think a lot of people don't. They will stand there and suffer in whatever way, listening to somebody ramble. And let's say that they go to the bathroom and they're holding it and holding it and holding it. They're getting just uncomfortable, and this person's not going to shut up. But they stand there. I mean, how many times have we been in situations like that?
Yeah.
Right. But when in reality, or it's something a bigger deal, like a longer term situation. That was like a moment one, but there's longer term situations of what do I need to do in this situation?
Yeah, so it goes back again to listening to your body's wisdom.
Right.
And it's hard to do that when you have so much information coming at you all the time. And so that kind of goes back to something you said a couple minutes ago around what happens in 2024 that makes it so hard for us to be present. I think it's because we are taking in information through all of our senses all the time. All the time.
all the time.
And it's a lot.
All the
And
time.
we have to digest all of that. And that's the thing that I think that we forget or we don't connect the dots on, right? Digestion isn't just our food. Of course, that's important, but we have to digest everything that comes into our bodies, all the sights, all the sounds, all the smells, all the sensations, right? We have to digest all that information. And I think of digestion as a 3-part thing, right? First, there's transformation. Then we integrate the pieces that are usable to us, and then we eliminate or let go of the pieces that aren't. And we can't go through that life cycle, right? We can't digest, integrate, and eliminate if we never have a chance to pause and actually
Right.
actually go through that process, right? And so, your example of, being in a conversation that's maybe overstimulating and not knowing what to do, it's hard for us to problem solve in that moment when our senses are overwhelmed, and they're chronically overwhelmed, right? It's like
Chronically.
all the time. There's very little time to shut it down. And so again, that goes back to the radical difference it can make in life to just pause and be quiet for a few moments
And unplug the drug, let's say that.
yeah, right. Just give ourselves a chance to not have information coming at us every second that we need to process.
I'm a big fan. You're preaching to the choir, Rachel, because I'm all about proactive mind health, and I'm in 100% agreement with you. And people, honestly, I think we just don't often value taking care of the mind
Yeah.
like we do the body. We just, not that we're always taking care of our bodies either, but I think
Sure.
the mind really takes a back seat off, and we don't. You sort of know when you're having somebody's having a Twinkie that this is probably not a great idea. Yet we'll listen to somebody maybe spewing toxic information somewhere, and that's the mental equivalent of drinking turpentine or something, right? But we'll put up with it maybe because it's socially. Maybe your boss is standing there. Maybe she's the one saying it. Like, who knows? But
Right.
we'll sort of tolerate what we're allowing in for various, because social courage is hard sometimes,
I love that term,
especially.
social courage.
Yeah, and it's especially if there's my younger son talks about that a lot. Social courage, and social courage can get really challenging when there's a power differential.
Oh,
Actually,
absolutely.
I just had that happen yesterday, actually, and
Hmm.
I mean it wasn't on a huge level, but I felt the discord there,
Yeah.
and it was with all due respect, but it takes a lot, and I think it's much easier to say that at a fabulous 59, because that is a process. It can be tougher on the younger years, I think,
Hmm.
especially when there's a power differential. It's a boss, or it's a professor, or it's your partner's parents,
Right.
and we sit there and we just get agita, we just get agita over whatever it is. It could be politics they're talking about, or whatever, but I think it feeds into what you're saying, though. In fact, isn't it? I don't, I'm not going to have somebody brilliant must have said this. I just don't remember what it is. But if you ever want to know what's going on with the mind, ask the body.
Mm.
It's kind of along the lines of what you're saying. So, okay, so I think lastly, Rachel, this is kind of a good kind of organic way we can wind this up here, because I think earlier you used the word resilience several times, and that you said, like, we kind of have this natural, we're naturally inclined to bounce back, like we're inclined to bounce back, and that sort of what you're saying is that our misinterpretations of pain and the body's wisdom is what gets in the way. Correct? Partially correct?
I have to think about that for a second.
Or maybe you want to do a total rephrase.
Say it again. Let me hear it again. Our
Well,
natural.
we started out talking about the pain in the nervous system, right? And then we were talking about how you were saying, like, there's pain gets a bad rap because it's giving us a clear message that something's not right, something's happening. Um,
Mhm.
and we can misinterpret that, and that we're naturally inclined to having these natural gifts we have, to bouncing back, to having resilience. And it's when there's that discord that we're prevented from resilience, right?
Yeah, so I think what you said earlier is important because we're not always accurate
Right.
in our perception, right? And that goes back to that rope and snake story, right?
Right, right,
The way
right.
we perceive something influences how we experience it, and that is going to be informed by the context and our past experiences and our present state of rest and nourishment and resilience, right? All of those things are going to feed into it, and that goes back to the idea of kind of being proactive if you can, if that's
Mhm.
possible in your life right now. And sometimes the reality is it's not. But doing things proactively to help you be in a place where you can be more resilient, right? So that again, that's giving yourself good rest and nourishing yourself in the way that your body needs to be nourished, and taking time to pause, right? All of those things. Um,
And
yeah.
ducking out of dodge, right? Ducking out, I don't mean to interrupt you, Rachel, but even let's say it's during the work day or school day or something. Because I know when I say something similar to my students, worst case scenario, dip into the bathroom. No one's going to bother you there, hopefully. So if you because 1 to 2 minutes, like earlier you were saying 1 to 2 minutes, and I agree. Sometimes it may not fix all of it, but if we take 2 minutes to breathe deeply alone,
Mm,
that's a pretty good reset. And if you can
totally.
breathe very deeply, it's neurological, as I know you know, it immediately returns a mind to the present moment from the future and the past. Doesn't
Mhm.
last for long, but it's an immediate break in that minute. And so, like, I'm out in the woods every day. If you have that, it's fantastic. Or if you're urban and you're out and there are trees around, or a park or something like that. But worst case scenario, if your life isn't that right now, and all you can do is duck into another room or a bathroom or something, it's still a power down, as you were saying earlier.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that there's some science that says that just a few breaths makes a really big difference in the
Huge.
responsiveness to the nervous system. It used to be 7. I don't know if that's still true. I don't know what the current research is in terms of whether or not they've quantified that, but I know from my own experience how much of a difference it makes. And yeah, I think, finding any quiet space is great, and I'd love for us to just normalize culturally,
Yes.
right, that like we don't have to go and hide to do that. Right, sometimes we do, and that's helpful, and being quiet, sometimes the only way to be quiet is to leave a situation if we can. But
We just closed the door. I
yeah,
literally go in my office and shut the door.
or do it in public. Like I remember when I was in grad school, it was so stressful studying physical therapy and having these practical exams, and we'd be sitting in the hallway waiting for our turn, and I would sit in the hallway and I would do my breathing practices.
I
And
love that.
admittedly, sometimes my classmates would kind of rip me a little bit for that, but then sometimes they'd join in, and it gave other people permission to do what they
Nice.
needed, right, for self-care and for centering. And gosh, it makes such a difference. And so a lot of the practices you can do without anybody even knowing that you're doing them, because
Oh,
it's just breathing,
totally.
right? So nobody knows what you're doing. You could be standing in line at the
Oh,
grocery store
oh,
in class doing
100%.
that, right? And how cool would it be if we said, you know what, I feel like I need a little bit of a break. Can you give me a few moments? And I'm going to breathe. Do you want to join me? Right? It doesn't have to be a secret.
No, it doesn't have to be a secret, Rachel. What a great way to wind up. I do the 4-7-8 breathing technique
Oh, I love that
constantly.
one.
I do it in threes because I feel great after I do it 3 times. But you
Yeah.
you actually jogged my memory, because I'm not afraid to do anything in public either. I'm constantly like, I put my hands out. So I'll tell you, I was at UVM. This is years ago, like maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. And I would not say I'm an anxious person in general at all. Medical stuff gets me a little anxious. And this was the preliminary thing before I had the procedure, which all turned out fine, but you had to go through the yuck, right? So I was in the preliminary thing for the procedure, and I was in the waiting room with people everywhere. And I just kind of sat back in my chair, put my hands out like this on my lap, and I just like zenned out. When they finally called my name, and they take your blood pressure right away, which probably
Yeah.
was 3 million over 2 million walking in there. But no, it was like 120 over 60 or something, because I'm like, I'm checking out of here.
Yeah,
Y'all,
that's great.
like, y'all, I'm checking out of here. This atmosphere is way too intense. So I'm going to close my eyes. So I'm not looking at stainless steel
Yeah.
or people behind the front desk, who are all lovely, actually. But no, because when I'm in any kind of medical thing, I just check out. So
I
I like
love that you did
that.
that. And
Yeah.
you're right, it probably did help your blood pressure a fair amount.
Yeah, I mean, not that I had high blood pressure, but I know when I'm in, it's that whole scene.
Yeah.
You know,
It's really stressful.
it just, yeah. And I'm just checking out, because the thing also, the deep breathing is good, but also when you close your eyes, the threat stuff the cord's being tripped by what we're looking at,
Yeah.
and maybe also what we're hearing, and maybe also what we're smelling. But shutting down, closing your eyes blocks a lot of the incoming information out.
Absolutely.
And so that, I thought that was you just reminded me of that. I totally zen when I'm in a doctor's office, because I just,
That's great. And I hope that someone in that room who was feeling anxious saw you and felt permission to follow your lead, right? To do whatever they needed in order to take care of themselves. You know, the more that we show up in our wholeness, the more space we open for other people to do the same. And so it's really beautiful that you did that.
I didn't even think of it till you brought up what you do. That's awesome. So this is a fantastic way to wind up with the amazing Rachel D. Simone, and also uh, later, when Rachel's going to give me her information for being the blurb down below, in case you want to contact Rachel with any kind of questions, or if you want resources or anything like that. And other than that, it should be up in a few weeks. So I will say to Rachel, thank you so much for using your life minutes, your valuable life minutes, in this way to be with us and share this important, important message.
Oh, thank you. This was really a joy. Before we close, can we do a quick little breathing practice together just to send people off
Totally.
with the tool? Okay, so if you're in a place where you can lie down, this is a nice thing to do lying down. And if you're not, you can do it sitting or standing or any position you want to be in. And if it feels possible for you and comfortable for you to close your eyes, you can let your eyes close down. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, you can let your eyes rest in a place that feels relaxed. And just take a few moments to just check in and notice what you're feeling. No right answer or wrong answer. Just bring your attention into your body. And we say that our energy follows our attention. And so this is one of my favorite practices to help balance the energy and calm the nervous system. So let your attention come to the sole of your left foot. And just feel the sensation at the sole of your left foot. And the next time that you breathe, imagine that you're breathing in from the left foot all the way up the left side of the body to the crown of the head. And then breathe out from the crown of the head down the right side of the body to the right foot. Inhale again from the right foot up the right side to the head. And then exhale down the left side of the body to the left foot. Right, following the pace of your breath, which might be faster or slower than mine. Right, inhale from the left foot to the head, feeling the energy travel up through the left side. Exhale, let that breath travel back down the right side to the right foot. Inhale, right foot to head. Exhale, head to left foot. Inhale, left side. Arcing breath and energy like a rainbow. Exhale, right side. In right. Out left. Let's do one more round. In left. Out right. In right. Out left. And let your awareness spread through your whole body. Take a deep breath in. And as you exhale, let it go with a sigh. If it would feel good, do that 1 or 2 more times. Let it come. And let it go. And when you're ready, you can let the mind come back into the room. And just look around your space and reorient yourself to wherever you are. And thanks for sharing that practice with me.
I love that, Rachel. I also love how you let us acclimate. I totally got into that. And
That's great.
you do have to reacclimate when you kind of open your eyes, like, whoa.
You do, right? So it can help to look around the room and just notice what you see and get grounded back in the environment.
What a great way to wind us up. I think that was fantastic. So remember on that note how important it is to breathe intentionally during the day, to take some minutes out when you're powering down, hitting the pause button, all these nice key buzzwords and phrases we have here. To breathe deeply, because it's not just touchy feely, as Rachel and I are both saying, it's actually a neurological reset. You're actually calming your mind on a cellular level, and it's very important to do that every day as much as possible, right? So
well said.
What?
I said so well said.
No, well, thank you. Thank you. You've been absolutely amazing, Rachel. It's been such a good conversation to have. And so thank you again for using your valuable life minutes to be here with us and have this important conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.